Welcome to the IJIS Institute Sounds of Safety podcast, where our community will be delving into a series of critical issues supporting the public sector mission space. On today's episode, we welcome back Casey Roussel, CCO of FusionStak and chair of the IJIS Justice and Public Safety Advanced Analytics Committee, and introduce Kyle Stoker, a crime analyst for the Raytown, Missouri Police Department and the director of training at the International Association of Crime Analysts. Casey and Kyle will be discussing what they believe is the definition of an analyst, the necessary skill sets for the job, and explain what it takes to become a successful crime analyst in today's market. Now let's hand it over to our host and guest for the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode here on the IJIS podcast. My name is Casey Roussel. I am the committee chair for the Advanced Analytics Committee at the IJIS Institute, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Kyle Stoker. He is a crime analyst in Raytown, Missouri, and he's also the director of training for the International Association of Crime Analysts. So, Kyle, welcome, and I'll give you the floor to tell everyone about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. So I've been the crime analyst at the Raytown, Missouri Police Department for it's almost 15 years. It's flown by. I was the very first analyst that they hired, and I'm the only analyst, so I wear all the different hats. Before that, I was actually a sworn officer in a suburb of Kansas City for a few years and decided that just wasn't really, for me, wasn't really how I wanted to spend the rest of my career. And at that time, crime analysis was kind of taking off in Kansas City, and that's when I first got exposed to it. So I left that position and I actually kind of interned for another analyst in the metro area for a couple of years. I had really bad timing. It was right in 2008 when everything kind of crashed and I had a really hard time finding a job. So it took a couple of years before I landed here at Raytown, and I've been here ever since. And I've been the training director for the IACA for the last, I think, 12 years. So been a really fun ride. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. When I say it out loud, it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah. And it's changed so much in the last 15 years. I'm excited to see what it does in the next 15.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. And welcome. And thanks for participating here. We greatly appreciate it. So first, let's start with your experience as an analyst. One of the conversations we have is understanding how the role of an analyst inside of a department has changed dramatically with the enhancements of technology, right? 15 years ago, I'm assuming your job duty or performance was extraordinarily different than what it is today. Can you just take a few minutes and explain how the role of an analyst has changed from 15 years ago versus to how it is today?
Yeah, it really has. It's kind of wild to think about because I don't know about you, but when I think of like if somebody were to say to me, 30 years ago, it's hard to imagine that like that was the 90s. Your sense of time just doesn't accurately reflect how long something is. So when I actually think back to when I started in 2010, that was when I started here at Raytown. But like I said, I started in law enforcement in 2005 and in crime analysis in around 2008. And at that time, there were actually still departments that would make like a paper bulletin or they'd make a bulletin on a computer, but they'd print it off on paper and then mail it through snail mail to other departments in order to share it. Like it wasn't quite as common, but it was still happening. And to think of that today, it's almost laughable to think that that's how you would distribute information. So it's become so much more complex and sophisticated than it was. The actual tasks in some regards haven't necessarily changed all that much, right? Like we're still trying to identify crime patterns and series and make forecasts and share information. So the goals haven't necessarily changed, but it's the way that we do that has changed so much. Most agencies now, again, it is not 100%. I have run into agencies even within the last few years that were still using like paper for their RMS. That's, I think, very, very rare these days. But most agencies now have pretty sophisticated RMS systems. Most agencies now, even if they don't have an analyst, they have within their RMS, they do have some kind of analytical capabilities. But the analysts themselves, we have so much more technology now than we used to. When I first started, I basically just had like Microsoft Office, and that was kind of it. And I had to do everything within that. And now we have sophisticated, specialized programs for GIS and analytical databases and software that can search every file on your computer and do Boolean searches and all these different things. And yes, those existed back then, but they're just so much more prevalent now than they were. So to me, that's kind of one of the biggest things that's changed is like I said, not necessarily the goal, but just the way that we go about doing that.
So, with the emergence of new technologies and more tools in your toolbox as an analyst, and some may say you're going to have a little bias on the question I'm about to ask you, but you also can give firsthand knowledge of it. In today's world, inside of departments where we see staffing shortages, different struggles, budget shortfalls, different things, how important and valuable is the role of an analyst inside of an agency? And before you answer, let's define analysts. So we're not talking about a detective or an officer that is proficient in how to use a computer, right? Like we're talking about
Right.
someone that is professionally trained on
Yes.
how to be an analyst. So how valuable in your experience in your police department, from what you're seeing through your training, how valuable is that analyst position? And is it a position that should be a very critical hire for every agency out there?
Well, I think so. I mean, yes, I am a little bit biased, like you said, because that's what I do. So I'm very passionate about crime analysis and the value that we bring to the table. But trying to be as objective as possible, I do think that there's a lot of value that we can bring. There are some agencies that use sworn personnel in this position. In the United States, most don't. Most of us are civilians. A lot of us have previous experience as an officer, which I think is really valuable. But one of my favorite quotes, and right off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I can't tell you who said it, but one of my favorite quotes goes something along the lines of, an agency without an analyst is like a submarine without sonar. We do so many different things that can help an agency maximize their patrol distribution and assignments. For example, we can help them maximize their investigators. There's just so many ways that we can increase efficiency and get the most out of a very small amount of money that most police departments have. At my own agency, in late 2017, 2018, our city had some severe budget shortfalls and they cut $3 million from our police department budget. And we're a very small department to begin with. So there was only so much that we could cut from training and technology and all these different things. And it got to the point where we were going to have to cut. We lost detention, all of our part-time positions, including like our community services unit, our administrative assistant, and they cut 17 police officer positions. Everybody saw the writing on the wall because they were cutting all these positions. We never actually had to lay anybody off officer wise because so many officers realized what was going on that a whole lot of them left for other agencies. Because let's face it, there's a shortage of cops anywhere. And so if you're a good cop, you can get hired anywhere you want. So we actually ended up losing somewhere in the realm of like 25 cops in about 6 months, which was just completely devastating. And at the time, there was a period of several weeks where command staff was going through this just brutal process of trying to figure out what could we pare down, where can we save like every penny. I mean, we literally we didn't have any budget at all for technology, for example. If something broke, we were fixing it ourselves, that kind of thing. So they were going through this process of paring everything down, and we weren't sure what they were going to cut. And I really was really worried that my position was going to be on the chopping block. But they ultimately, my position was never actually in danger, and they kept me. And part of that is because they were able to recognize that my job, my role, and the things I can bring to the department, because we lost so many officers and our manpower was just slashed by this huge amount in a short period of time, I was then able to still help them make the most of what we still had. So to me, that's one of the best pieces of evidence that a department really needs an analyst, is the fact that when they're faced with this huge shortfall, they chose to keep this one specific position over They could have had another detective. They could have kept another patrol officer. They could have kept, used my funding for detention, things like that. But they chose to keep it in crime analysis because they recognize the value.
Yeah. So I'm changing my direction here
Sure.
based on something you said. One of the questions that we often ponder is that, okay, these smaller departments that say, hey, I get it. A crime analyst is important, but I don't believe that either I don't have the budget or I don't know if we have enough, call it crime or instances where this would take a full-time employee. So then I'm going to go to a route of it's going to be a part-time, function of some sworn officer that we know is really never going to happen, right? They need someone that's really trained in this. Do you see in the industry, is there the opportunity where these, let's call it regions, where multiple departments that say, we don't have the budget for a full time, but we're willing to contribute to get X number of hours a week? Can I get 10 hours of a professionally trained analyst? Do you see any cases around the country where agencies are forming more like regional analysts groups or operations that serve multiple departments?
Yeah, I have heard of that. I don't know that there's necessarily been any in the Kansas City region where I'm from, but I have heard of that in other parts of the country, and I do think that's a really viable option. I think one of the hard parts is just, police departments, they're almost like college teams. Like there's kind of rivalries, between them. And sometimes it can be really hard to get departments to kind of work together like that. But it's a good option, especially if you have several small agencies that, like you said, they only need, 8 hours a week or something like that. But yeah, we see a lot of part-time analysts they're also doing, some IT functions or maybe records or property, or they're, like you said, a sworn officer, things like that. That's really, really common.
Got it. Cool. So this next conversation we're going to go into is one that I ask every analyst that I have on here, and I kind of want to get your thoughts because people that'll listen to this at a department, their first thoughts is going to be, well, I do analytics. Yeah, I've got analytics. And when you dive into that, really what they have is some
Yeah.
reporting, right? The RMS and the CAD, it spits out reports. And so everyone thinks that they're doing
Right.
analytics. So I always tell people, well, the difference that we see is that the reporting will tell you what's happening. It'll tell you what's going on, where you see everything, but the analytics helps you understand why it's happening. And once you understand why it's happening, then you can go put in measures to try to, get ahead of the curve, like figure out how to stop these things, not only solve the crimes, but figure out ways that you can deploy patrol, deploy personnel, take steps in the community to kind of stop these things from happening in the first place. So what is, when you talk about analytics in your mind of Kyle Stoker, what is analytics in your world?
Well, like you said, it's taking more than just facts and figures. Anybody can spit out like, well, we have 25 widgets today. Well, what does that mean? You need to have an understanding of, is that number high, low? What is the context? That context is everything, because and that's something that crime analysts really struggle with, is trying to convey that context to command staff or citizens or city council or whoever. If I were to come to you and say that we had 20 auto thefts last week, you don't have any idea whether is that, holy smokes, that's a lot, or yeah, that's nothing. Like, there's so many things about the jurisdiction and about the metro area that you're in, all these different factors that go into, what does that actually mean? And a big part of the analyst job is becoming an expert in your local crime so that or you can figure out, are those numbers normal? Are they low? Are they high? What's that context there? And then how do you convey that to other people? And then what are you going to do about it?
Got it. Makes sense. So you said something there about understanding your local crime of what's going on. As we all know, every local department, sheriff, police department, they have to operate within jurisdictional boundaries, whereas criminals don't. There is no crime boundaries with it. How important it is for you? Do you have a working relationship? So your neighboring departments, your county department, have they embraced the analyst model like your department has? And how important is it for you to work in tandem with your surrounding analysts involved in how you, what numbers you present? What effect does the surrounding numbers play in your numbers that you present to your leadership?
They have a really, really strong effect. My agency, we're a little bit unique. I always call us the hole in the donut. We are completely surrounded by Kansas City, Missouri, except for like one very small, tiny little portion that's another city. But the entire Kansas City metro, and that's one of the really cool changes that I've kind of seen over the last 15 years, is that there were a handful of analysts when I first started. When Raytown hired me, like I said, I was the very first analyst that they hired, and they never had one before. It was kind of unusual for an agency that size on the Missouri side, because Kansas City, we have Kansas and Missouri right in the middle, and so the metro area is kind of split in half. So Raytown was one of the first smaller agencies on the Missouri side to have one in the Kansas City metro. And since that time, it's really kind of blossomed. And now, if you were to look at a map and see the coverage of the city or of the metro area, most agencies have at least somebody doing some kind of analytical work. Networking here in the Kansas City area, I think that's something that we especially do really well. As I talk to analysts from all over the country, it's kind of interesting how different the regions, there's kind of different cultures in different regions, and I find that kind of interesting. But here in the Kansas City area, I think that's something that we're really, really strong with, is working together. I have a really good working relationship with analysts from all over the metro area. I think there's something like 43 agencies in the Kansas City metro, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how many have analysts, but probably somewhere between 50 and 60%. And I know somebody at every agency, and I'm really close with most of the analysts. So if I need something, I can pick up the phone and call somebody somewhere. And if I don't know a person, then somebody else that I do know probably does. We share information all the time. We bounce ideas off of each other. It's a really great resources that, if I'm not sure how to accomplish a goal, I can call up one of my good analyst friends and say, like, hey, I've got this problem. What do you think about this solution? I can kind of describe what I think I'm going to do. Do you think this is a good way to go about it? Or do you have any suggestions, or just sharing resources and things like that? That's so important, not only for being, like I said, being able to share those resources or answer questions or get advice, but also to learn new techniques. We all have different tools and resources that we have access to. Some agencies have more money than others, and we're able to share those resources. Or, hey, can you look up this? Like right now, my agency doesn't have any LPRs. That's something that we're working on getting, but we don't have any at the moment. So to be able to contact another agency and say, hey, can you check these LPRs for me, or look and see if you have any hits, or traffic cams, things like that. Like there's all this technology that every year there's something new, and not every agency can have every tool, right? So we kind of can share the load that way. That's just a really cool thing. And the analysts themselves, everybody has slightly different skill sets and different things that they're good at and that they're interested in. And so to be able to learn new things from those analysts and get new ideas has been a really important part of my career development, because not any one person can learn every possible skill or every possible tool. It's just not feasible. But together we can really maximize our efforts and our resources, and just it makes the whole community, analytical community, stronger and better, which in turn then makes us more effective as analysts, which makes our police departments more effective, which then makes society better overall. So it's really important.
Got it. And I heard you say a couple times that you're a really small department, but from what I'm looking at, your Raytown, Missouri has a population of about 30,000 people, maybe a little more than that now. This is a 2020 number. I mean, it's really good to hear that even though you're a suburb of Kansas City, that the importance an analyst has, even in a smaller city like yours, it's still a very valuable resource to that department, even though when the town or city was going through these budget issues and we need to reduce our expenses, that analyst position was never really on the chopping block. Everyone clearly understood that, this is not just some luxury position we have because we've got some money. No, it's a very crucial, critical role that we have in our department, and it's not even up for debate on whether or not we keep this position or not. I think that's really
Yeah.
a really powerful message to these departments that are trying to understand just how important that role is.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Got it. Cool. Let's spend some time this last little segment. As I mentioned in the introduction, you are the training director for the IACA, the International Association of Crime Analysts. So I think that one of the biggest gaps we have across all law enforcement right now is lack of training. We see it most of the times,
Agreed.
the unfortunate events we hear that our news media loves to point out is always kind of tied back to what we would say is lack of training. And most of that is done with lack of resources as the cause for it. But when we're talking about analysts, we're not talking about people that just know how to operate a computer and run some reports. It's really a
Right.
very significant defined skill set of the crime analyst. And I think this is it's a nonprofit organization here that, provides this training to people that want to go through it. Can you tell us a little bit about the association and the work that you all do and what kind of role and, benefits it has to people that are interested in this line of work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the IAC is something that I'm really proud of and I'm really passionate about. So, like you said, we're a nonprofit professional organization. They were founded in 1990, so we're coming up on 40 years here. And basically, the goal is just to promote crime analysis and to help analysts grow their skill set and network and just professionalize this career in as many ways as we can. So right now, I think the last number I heard was roughly 6,500 members throughout the world. We are international. So it's a big organization and it's getting bigger all the time. And we have a lot of different ways that we can benefit our members, but primarily through our conferences and our training opportunities. So we hold an in-person conference every year. It kind of rotates around the United States. Pre-COVID, they would do an international symposium, and then obviously COVID, kind of screwed everything up. So they're trying to get that back on track. But every year we hold an in-person conference every week, and honestly, it's one of my favorite things every year. It's a way to get together with 700 other people that feel just as passionate and excited about crime analysis as I do. And you get to learn all these new techniques and meet all these people and honestly, kind of do a little bit of griping about, like, oh, my RMS is this, or my officers don't write this in their reports. And, people that know the frustrations and can commiserate with us. So it's your own people, your like-minded folks. And it's just, for me, it really is a way to just kind of rejuvenate myself. It kind of recharges my batteries after a long year. This year, it hasn't happened yet. It's coming up in late September in Las Vegas. Next year, it'll be in Orlando, Florida. So, like I said, it kind of hops around the world, the country. But in addition to that, we also have a whole lot of different training opportunities, and that's my kind of niche is the training committee. So we do webinars a couple of times a month, and those are hour long, hour and a half long sessions. Every year we try to do a theme. So we'll have one every month on any particular theme that continues out through the year. So this year it's tactical analysis. So we started at the very beginning of like, what is tactical analysis? How do you identify a series? What do you do once you've identified a series? How do you make predictions? Right now we're kind of in the predictions section of it. So last year it was on Power BI. The year before that was on ArcGIS Pro. So we kind of hit a bunch of different topics. But in addition to that year-long theme, we also do just kind of random webinars on all kind of different topics. We also do webinars in Spanish and Italian, and we're trying to add further languages in addition to that, because like I said, we are international. We also have 12-week online classes. I compare them to kind of a typical college class. So they're asynchronous online classes that you can do the work anytime you want to. So because we know that we have a lot of people that, maybe they work nights or they have shift work or they're, like I said, international, they're in different time zones. Those classes don't have any live component to them. So you can get online and do the work whenever you need to during the week. But there's 15 different topics and they range from the very basic fundamentals of crime analysis. Like we start at the very beginning. What is it? And what are the basics you need to know, up to more advanced topics, pattern analysis and problem analysis and administrative and strategic analysis, crime mapping, all kinds of things like that. And then we also do offer some material in person for agencies that want to bring us in and host a class. Like I said, COVID has really kind of impacted that as well. So the online classes are kind of our primary method of training right now. Those are really, really popular. So every year I have 12 to 1,300 students go through an online class. We have several thousand students that do our webinars. So there's a good number of people that are coming through our trainings every year. And we're constantly adding new topics and trying to make sure that we're keeping up with best practices and new technologies and things like we talked about at the beginning. This field just changes so much. There's always new software, new capabilities, LPR and AI and all these different things. So we're constantly trying to make sure that we're staying on top of that.
No, great. Thanks for that. Let me ask you this.
Sure.
If you've got someone that's listening that is, let's say they're graduating high school or they're enrolled in college because their parents or the world told them, hey, it's the thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they have any interest at all in saying, hey, maybe being a crime analyst is something that I would really like to do, what would be your recommend? And I understand this is your opinion, but with your expertise, what would be the path for them to say, okay, where I am now, what do I go through in order to become a crime analyst? Is going to get a criminal justice degree required? Do I have to have a college education? Or is there a way from high school or from, if I'm just currently enrolled in college and this is what I want to do, what is the path? What would be your recommendation of how to go from where I'm at to have an idea to, okay, I am a quote unquote certified crime analyst? What does that look like?
Yeah. There's actually a lot of different paths. Most departments do want at least a bachelor's degree, but I do know of some that will accept an associate's or some form of experience, like military experience, something like that. So it is not, I can't say that it's like set in stone that you have to have a bachelor's degree, but it is recommended. The type of degree doesn't really matter. I know analysts that have, I know one that has an English degree. I know several that have mathematics. I've seen people with communications. Mine is in criminal justice, but there's a lot of different degrees. I also know people that don't have degrees at all, that, like I said, they had experience in other fields. But you do need to have some computer skills. You need to be pretty confident with a computer and be able to learn. If you have the ability to kind of self teach, that will really go a long way. But if you haven't had any classes through college that are related to like criminal justice, just like the foundations of the criminal justice system, that kind of thing, then you really need some kind of training like the fundamentals class that I mentioned earlier. One way that a lot of analysts, especially here in the Kansas City metro that I know of, and myself included, that we got hired was by like volunteering or interning for an existing analyst and working with them to kind of shadow them and learn on the job. That has been a really successful way. Like I said, there's at least 7 or 8 people I can think of that are currently working as crime analysts in the Kansas City metro area, myself included, that started that way. So like I said, there's different paths. You can go through the military, you can go through a college degree, you can start out as an officer and then transition over. There's not just one specific way, but each department has a little bit different requirements. So I would say if you're trying to get into the field, the first thing I would recommend doing is contacting a local analyst and trying to just see if you can take them out for a cup of coffee or get lunch and talk to them and find out kind of what their career path was. Because like I said, every agency and kind of every region has a little bit different culture around like what that background it typically looks like. I know some states have their own certification process, and so those jobs are really competitive. And so if you don't have a degree or you don't have that state certificate, you're probably not going to get hired. So if you can figure out what that kind of looks like in your regional area, that's really going to go a long way. And one of the things on the IACA website, they're not necessarily chapters, but there's regional associations that are associated with the IACA. So like in Kansas City, ours is called MARCIN. It's the Mid-America Regional Crime Analysis Network. There's a similar version for Virginia, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas. Most regions have something like that. And you can start at that level and use that as a way to kind of get to know some people. And, hopefully you can find somebody that would just let you sit and shadow with them for a day, or like I said, take them out to lunch or get some coffee, and you can kind of talk to them about what their path looked like. And that will give you an idea of what the region kind of requires.
I'm looking at it now, and it's not a shocker that here in Louisiana, we don't have anything set up. We're normally last at a party and just about everything we do. So maybe
Yeah.
that's something that we can work on. But my next question to you is, if I don't see, tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm a chief, if I'm a sheriff, and I'm like, okay, I want to have an analyst, I want to start this process of filling this role. Kyle, is it most likely that you have to have the mindset that I'm probably not going to the market and finding a very well experienced analyst? It's probably me hiring someone that fits the background criteria, and then it's on the job learning and training where, hey, at first I might not get a whole lot of value, but as this person trains and learns, eventually I'm going to have a really strong resource. Is that normally the case, or do you think there's an abundance of analysts out there that are available?
I think that just really comes down to the geographic location and how much you're willing to pay. It is a competitive field. There are, in certain regions especially, there are a lot more analysts than there are openings. So if, for example, you're a chief in one of those areas, then you could probably have kind of the pick of the litter as long as your pay is competitive. But if you're a smaller agency in a smaller metro area and you're not necessarily willing to pay very good, then you probably are going to end up with maybe a recent college grad. And like you said, they're going to kind of learn on the job. But one of the things that the IACA has on our website is we do have some resources that can help departments with that hiring process. And so it's some recommendations on things to look for in a resume, job descriptions, literal interview questions, practical exam you can administer, things like that. So if you want an analyst but you don't know where to get, like how to start or what to look for, the IAC is a good resource. But also if there is a regional association like Marcan, we have assisted agencies. We can provide people to sit on an oral board, for example, or we can help review resumes to help you kind of weed through. Because sometimes I have sat on oral boards before for other agencies, and you have somebody that looks really good on paper, and then you bring them in the interview and you ask them, what is problem oriented policing, and they can't answer the question at all, right? So they're not actually a good candidate, even though they look pretty good on the resume. So there are resources for agencies if they don't know where to get started and they want some help.
Yeah. So tell me if you see that this is possible. Let's say that I'm an analyst, I'm a really good analyst, and I live in, I don't know, sunny Miami, Florida. I love my climate, but there's agencies in the middle of rural America that really want to hire an analyst. Do you see that this is a role that can be filled with remote workers, or does being on site in person every day kind of mandatory to be a successful analyst?
Personally, I don't think it's mandatory. At kind of the very beginning of COVID, my agency had me working from home for about 6 months. And then I was hybrid for another 3 or 4 where I split my time between the department and at home. I know multiple agencies now where they let their analysts work 1 or 2 days from home. And I think it comes down to how long has the person been there. In my case, I had already been in my agency about 10 years. I would not recommend that a brand new analyst, especially for an agency that's never had one, I would not recommend that you start as a completely remote position. I think it could be done with the right person, but there's a lot to be said for building up relationships with your officers. That's one of kind of the universal analyst experiences, is that your officers may not, especially if there's never been one before, is that they don't know what you do and they don't know how to utilize you and your skill sets. And they may even be a little bit skeptical. They may just think that you're kind of a bean counter, or that you're there to do, maybe keep stats on them or something like that. Like, it took years for my guys. Sometimes they still even come to me with IT questions, but it took years for them to realize that I wasn't actually just the IT guy. And that seems to be a really universal experience for a lot of analysts. So if you're starting out remote, that really kind of puts you behind in building those connections and making those relationships with your detectives and your patrol officers. Because a part of what makes a good analyst is an element of trust between you and the rest of the department, and them trusting the products that you're putting out, the predictions you're making, that kind of stuff. And if they don't trust the work that you're doing, then they're not going to take any action on it. They're not going to do anything with it. And essentially, you're just wasting your time. So, like I said, I think it can be done once that relationship is established, but I wouldn't recommend starting out that way.
Gotcha. And kind of last question about the association? Is it association of individuals, or do you also partner and work with departments as well that are part of the association affiliated, or is it more just the actual analysts themselves?
Well, we do have like group memberships. If I understand your question correctly, we do have group memberships where like a larger entity that has a whole bunch of analysts, they can come to us and say, we want to enroll all of our analysts in your training or in the association itself. So we can work with that. But primarily we're dealing with like the individual analyst. So like here at Raytown, I am the member, the ICA deals with me. They don't really have any interaction with the rest of the department.
Got it. So it can be kind of either or, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because some agencies are large enough that they have 12, 15, 20 analysts. They may have a really big analytical unit, which is fantastic. We're starting to see that more and more because they recognize that there's so many different types of analysis and so many different aspects. So that's a really great thing. But a lot of agencies still only have like one or two people. So it just kind of depends on the size of the agency.
Perfect. So the last little thing that I want to offer up to the listeners is that if someone's listening or they know someone that is possibly contemplating if this is something that they would want to do in a career, can you just take a few minutes, as much as you want, and tell them, in your opinion, why this is a profession that they should consider?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much fun. I love this job so much and I get so much enjoyment and so much satisfaction out of it. Like I said at the very beginning, I started as an officer and I'd known for a very long time that I wanted to go into law enforcement and my dream as a kid was always to be a cop. And then I got into it and realized, you'll laugh at this, but I didn't really realize beforehand that I was an introvert. So it wasn't until I got through the academy and I was working the streets that I realized like, oh man, I really don't like interacting with people all this often and especially the public. And so once I found crime analysis, it was like my mind was blown that like, okay, this is the perfect thing for me because I can be my introverted self. I can, still help my community, help my agency. I can provide all these services, but I'm good with computers. I'm good with technology. I enjoy learning new things. I do interact with people, obviously. I interact with my fellow analysts in my department and I take calls from the public sometimes, but it's not nearly at the same level as an officer. But it's kind of like, we joke sometimes that it's kind of like being a detective without having to go through the academy or worry about getting shot at or things like that. Like I get to follow an investigation all the way from the beginning to the end and see what happens at the end and be an effective resource and be a helper, be somebody that can make a difference in society, but it's behind a computer, it's behind a desk. So it has, to me, it's kind of the best of both worlds because I'm still in law enforcement, I'm still helping people, but I also don't have, shift work and the risk and putting up with abuse from the public and that kind of stuff. But to me, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, I really enjoy learning new things and getting exposed to new technology. So it's constantly changing and evolving, and I enjoy that part of it. But I enjoy the technical aspects of it and learning new social media techniques and LPRs and all that kind of stuff. So to me, it's kind of the best of everything. It's not for everybody. Some people don't necessarily like the technical aspect of it, but if you're good with computers and you enjoy learning those things and doing those types of skills and learning those skill sets, then yeah, it's a really, really rewarding career. Most people that I know get into analysis and they stay into it until they retire. So I think that's a pretty good indicator of how well people like their jobs.
That's great, man. I appreciate that. So first, I want to thank you, man. Thanks for taking the time with us today.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And giving us some really good information and sharing kind of your story. So again, man, thanks for your service and everything you do for your community there and taking the time with us today again. Kyle, appreciate it, buddy. Be safe out there, man. And let us know if we can ever do anything to help you, brother.
All right. You too.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Sounds of Safety podcast. Be sure to stay connected with the IJIS Institute on LinkedIn and X, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple Music, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform to catch future episodes. From cybersecurity to artificial intelligence and deep dives into critical national data sharing initiatives, the Sounds of Safety podcast has you covered. Until next time.